Hello, and welcome to the Reconstruction.us podcast, the place where people from all walks of life discuss what we can all do to transform America into a more equitable nation and ourselves in the process. My name is Kimberly Miller, and I am the host of this show, as well as the website Reconstruction.us, where you can find articles and essays by myself and others who are deeply concerned about the state of our nation and are committed to making real change. Well, we are now less than 3 months from Election Day, and the time has come for us to get busy if we are going to defeat Donald Trump this November. As many of our listeners are aware, the Republican Party has moved into high gear to keep people from voting by any means necessary. Our president has even gone so far as to rewrite the fundamental rules of governance by appointing a new postmaster general who has been systematically shutting down mail processes and threatening to close post offices in an effort to delay mail delivery and create fear around mail-in voting. Just over the weekend, however, over 24 House Republicans defected, breaking with Trump and party leaders and siding with Democrats to provide $25 billion to the U.S. Postal Service and explicitly prohibit any operational changes that would hurt our right to vote. It is clear that this year, more than ever, we need to pull out all the stops to defeat Trump and overcome these anti-democratic strategies. Today's guest is leading an exciting campaign designed to do just that. Scott Forman is the head of Vote Forward, a new approach to helping get out the vote this fall. I've asked him to join me today to share his perspective on recent events and to help spread the word about his outstanding and very exciting campaign. And welcome, Scott. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to talking with you about all of this.
Great, great. Well, listen, could we actually start? I would just really appreciate if maybe you could share some of your perspective on what's been happening in terms of voter rights and voter suppression this year.
Well, sure. Like many of us, I think we are pretty concerned about various of the measures that are being undertaken, both by the Trump administration and by allies of theirs at the state level, and just in the media more generally, to call into question some of the things that we ought to be able to take for granted about the functioning of our democracy. So
Mhm.
there are a number of tactics that are alarming. It seems like they're multiplying. So efforts to, concrete efforts to try to just deny access to the polls by disenfranchising people who have felony convictions. We were deeply uh, upset about the undoing of a lot of the progress in Florida
Mhm.
by sort of legislative action after the fact. Um, and then just you mentioned the changes at the post office. We're very concerned about that. And I think that the deepest problem in my mind, though, is the attempt to call into question people's confidence in the administration of the election. I
Mhm.
continue to have a great deal of faith that we can have a fair and relatively free election. But I think it's really damaging to the function of any democracy when significant numbers of people start to doubt that. And so, just personally, that's the thing that concerns me the most.
Yes, yes, I completely agree. I think it would be upsetting, frankly, on a personal level, no matter what, if you have been raised to believe in inclusive democracy, which I certainly was, and it
Yes,
sounds like you were as well.
I was too.
Um, but I mean, I think particularly having watched over the last 20 years this steady march of voter suppression,
Yeah.
which has been very clearly strategically implemented really with every branch of government,
Yeah.
is something that, I talk to friends all the time who will hear about something positive that happened with Biden, or, looking at the polls, and express a lot of confidence about, oh, we're definitely going to win. And frankly, my concern isn't actually whether or not we'll win the popular vote. Democrats have won the popular vote consistently every single election for over 20 years.
Yeah.
The question is, will we be able to overcome the voter suppression?
Yeah. Well, and the structural problems too. I mean, the
Mhm.
Electoral College itself is a form of, is a kind of betrayal of the one person, one vote IDL.
Yes.
And those things are harder to change, obviously, over time. But what doesn't have to happen, and what I really believe is a deep betrayal, is the deliberate attempt to go even further and try to make sure that people don't vote or can't vote. Um, it doesn't have to be that way, and it's deeply upsetting. So
Mhm.
that's part of why we exist, is to try to be a counterforce against some of the worst of those pressures.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I have to say, as an African American and growing up during the 60s, this was a huge part of the battle 50, 60 years ago. And it's a very familiar territory. And so I am frankly very excited to see folks like yourself getting more actively involved, and really understanding that this is not, literally, if the Black vote is suppressed in Georgia, for example, that is your vote too. It's every
Sure.
Democrat's vote.
I think that's a very important point, that the suppression of some people's votes is a curtailment of the value of everybody's votes. I think that's a very interesting idea. I like that, and it's important.
Yeah, yeah. Well, before we get too carried away with the political history of all of this, let's talk about your campaign. What is Vote Forward?
Right. So, Vote Forward is a nonprofit organization. We're a 501(c)(4). So just to emphasize this, because it's always important context, that means that we do both explicitly political work. So we have campaigns whose goal is to elect Democrats and defeat Trump, and that's less than half of our activity. And then we also have what we think of as our core purpose, our core mission as a nonprofit, which is more generally to increase participation in the electorate among traditionally underrepresented communities. So I did just want to note that for the record, that
Mhm.
whenever I'm talking about my political preferences, they're my own, and but then also in some contexts, when we talk about Vote Forward's political campaigns, that's only part of our work. The core of our work is that broader social mission.
And
So
just
then,
to
yeah,
clarify for folks, so a
yeah,
501(c)(3), if you were
yes,
organized under that designation, you wouldn't be able to be explicitly
correct.
for a single party.
That's right. That's
Right.
that's
But
exactly right.
50(c)(4) does allow you to participate in some of that.
It's the hybrid one. It's the one that can do both the kinds of things that a 501(c)(3) would do, as long as it's the majority of our work, which it is, and then can also spend a certain proportion of our effort on explicitly political campaigns.
Mhm.
So that's just by way of background. The more important story is, we uh, the structure of our program is that we try to empower volunteers to do the things that we believe are most effective at increasing voter turnout and voter participation more generally. And we, based on some experiments that I ran in 2017 and 2018, have been able to demonstrate that sending a handwritten letter in the mail to a voter who's relatively unlikely to vote appears to be one of the most effective things that you can do to increase voter turnout. And
Mm.
so the core of our program on both the political side and the apolitical side is that we organize an army of volunteers out there in the world using software that we've built to, as we say, adopt voters who are relatively unlikely to vote, and then send them letters in the mail pretty close to the election, typically, that essentially plead with them to go cast a ballot. And we've been able to show in a few different experiments that that tactic can increase voter turnout by anywhere from about 1 percentage point to as much as 3+ percentage points in one of our earliest experiments. Even at less than those numbers, that's it might not sound like much because they're like single digits, but in the world of this these kinds of tactics, it's very competitive with phone banking, even knocking on doors, which is historically the kind of gold standard for get out the vote efforts.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
novel tactic, powered by software, lots of volunteers participating. And I guess the other interesting element of it is that we have the advantage of being able to do some sort of time shifting of when the communications are happening versus when the labor is happening. So our project for the year
Ah, right,
is to try to
right.
send 10 million letters in October, but we started in January. And so, unlike with phone banking or text banking or knocking on doors, you can accumulate a stockpile of letters to be sent and then drop them all in the mail right before the election when they've been proven to be most effective. And
Hmm.
that's the structure of our program this year.
Wow. And so 10 million letters is the goal.
10 million is the goal. In
So that
our
would be 100,000 or
yes,
200,000, 300,000 potential votes that
potentially,
might not have gotten cast.
potentially, yeah. I mean, I don't want to make too strong a claim about that because
Hmm.
it's a very high salience election, and it, you know, it's very hard to be sure. Although we try to structure as much of our effort as experimentation as possible, so that we can try to get a clear reading on that. But yes, that is the magnitude of the effect that we hope to have, and as you noted, it's that's those are the kinds of margins on which races are sometimes won or lost. So
Absolutely.
we do think that that it is there's a chance of sort of influencing some outcomes on the political side.
Mhm. Um, are there particular states or areas of the country that your campaign is focused on?
Yes, on the political side of things, we're focused on the states that are one of three things, either or sometimes multiple of them. They're either critical for winning the presidency or some reasonable chance of being one of the tipping point states that puts Biden over the edge. They are a state with a competitive Senate race because it's very important for us to win the Senate this year for obvious reasons.
Yes.
And um, and then the third, I think, is really important, and people sometimes forget about this. We focus a lot of attention on states where the state legislature is controlled by Republicans, but there's some chance of flipping it to control by Democrats, even one of two chambers, and that's critically important this year because control of the state legislatures is what determines who uh, draws the district boundaries for the next decade
Yes.
after the census. And so we definitely take that into account as well in deciding where to focus our political efforts.
Hmm.
On the core purpose side, there's some overlap. We essentially focus on states that have large populations of people who are traditionally underrepresented in the electorate. And so the logic is a little bit different for where we focus.
Hmm. So, can I ask you what would be a traditionally underrepresented group then, or a person, for example?
Well, so it's essentially Black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, and Native Americans. Um,
So it
and
really is people of color
it's people of color,
that churn
essentially.
out just in disproportionately lower numbers. Is that right?
So generally speaking, yes. I think that's not universally true. It's also there's other logic to this too. It's partly about communities uh, that suffer from some degree of voter suppression, and that's part of the rationale as well. We do this can also include young people who are traditionally underrepresented in the electorate in a way that is very problematic. That's not currently part of the targeting for most of our campaigns, but it is sometimes something that we do, and we may do more of that in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, you just read my mind on that one because I was thinking about the campaigns with Obama for his first and second term, and that was obviously a huge part of
For
his
sure.
margin of victory was his ability to really excite a lot of young
Yes,
folks.
absolutely. Now, even Obama, if you look at the shape of the turnout curve, the voter turnout among young people was still dramatically lower than among older people, and that's the kind of structural problem in American democracy that we have a kind of long-term ambition to help to address.
Hmm.
It's a very hard problem. I'm not exactly sure how to solve it, but we're definitely interested in pursuing that more in the future.
I've thought about this some myself lately, because I've been more aware, or I would have to say I think I've realized more in the last couple of years how much changes in the education system
Hmm.
have really started to impact um, what younger folks understand, know, how they think, the whole orientation towards testing that No Child Left Behind really forced, imposed upon the school systems, meant that a lot of teachers didn't get to teach a lot of important things. And I have a feeling, I don't know that this is true. I haven't done any study or anything, but I'm wondering how much participation in our democracy and understanding the systems of government and the three branches of government, how much that may or may not have been sort of pushed to the side.
I think that's a very interesting question. I don't know the answer either, but it sounds like a very plausible hypothesis to me that that could be the source of some of the disengagement that we see from younger people. Although I would note that I'm pretty sure it's been true for a long, long time that rates of voting among younger people are generally quite low
Yeah, that's
relative to
very
older
fair. That's
people.
very fair. It's true.
And
I mean,
so,
I'm
yeah.
kind of a weirdo because I grew up in a household that was very political
So
and
did I.
very progressive, and so it was never I mean, I don't believe there's one single presidential election that I haven't voted in since I could vote.
Yeah.
But I know that makes me unusual in
Yeah.
terms of the younger demographics.
Yeah. Um, your note about Obama, I think, is really important. I do think there are tactical things that organizations like ours can do to marginally boost turnout among young people. But I really feel like inspiring them with a vision of what our country could look like is the only really it's the ultimate answer to this question. Like our politics, I think, should be about vision and about like a positive case for what what can happen to improve people's lives when we have uh, elected officials who really represent all of us. Um, and that I think is an important part of this is that the deeper reason to want to increase voter turnout is that I think in just a lot of fundamental ways, the democracy is healthier um, when elected officials feel like they're beholden to all of us and not just to some of us. And so um, that is less about who wins and who loses, and it's more about who who our elected officials feel accountable to. Obviously, it's related to who wins and loses, but that, at least personally, is a big part of the reason why I think this is so important.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I I often think that we forget that ultimately, even those elected officials who don't feel beholden to us, it really is ultimately, if they fear the people, they will act
Sure,
accordingly. I mean, that's why
absolutely.
so many of the environmental agencies, for example, came in under Richard Nixon. It was because there were so many people in the streets and so much activity happening all the
Yeah.
time. It really pushed him.
Yep.
It's a really good
Ultimately,
point.
they are our employees, and I feel like it's worth thinking about it that way
Good
sometimes.
for you. I
um,
totally agree.
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about your campaign
Yes.
specifically. So you're talking about writing 10 million letters. That's a heck of a lot. Now I just I signed up. I made sure I signed the right things anyway today. I think I did.
Oh, great.
Um, if and I already have a friend, we're planning on doing a little letter writing party, and
I love it.
hopefully one of a few that we'll have to try to, contribute and write a bunch of letters. How exactly does this work? So if I just hear about this on the podcast,
Mhm.
where would I start and how would it roll out?
Yes. Okay. So it's pretty easy. You go to votefwd.org. So VOTEFWD.org, or you can just search Google for Vote Forward and it'll bring you to the right place. If you don't have an account yet, you sign up. We will ask a few basic questions of you to make sure that you are a real person with good intentions. You can expect to be it should only take a minute, but you can expect to be asked things like your zip code, and you have to click one of those "I'm not a robot" deals as usual, and then we ask people to write like just a sentence or two to explain why they're participating. Approvals typically happen within less than a day. We do it twice a day. So you shouldn't have to wait very long to be approved. And then once you are approved, you will be automatically assigned to a state. And you can change that if you want. Some people have a preference about which state they write to, and some people don't. Um, you adopt voters. Again, that's the term we use. And we use it mainly because we want to emphasize that once you do that, they're really yours. So like nobody else will be assigned the same person. So by claiming them, you're sort of making a commitment of sorts to get them done. Because if you don't, nobody else will. Um, Once they're claimed, you click a button and you get a PDF that you download that has a letter template. Most of it is typed, so it's prepared by our system, and that is largely just to make it easy, and also partly to make sure that some of the most important information is very legible, like the date of the election. And you print it out. You write a couple of sentences about why you vote, why you, the sender, vote in every election that you're eligible to vote in. We provide the name and address of the recipient. We provide a return address that is a post box that we rent, so you don't have to use your own home address, which many people prefer not to do. Um, you put it in the envelope, you put a stamp on it, and you hold it until October, likely October 27th is our mail date, so just before the election. And that's it. Each one takes about, depending on how much you write, takes a few minutes. And we have found, I'm glad to hear that you're working on it with a friend. We found that people do seem to really, before the pandemic, people were doing a lot of parties, house parties to do them together. And a lot of that activity has moved over to Zoom. So there are various virtual letter writing parties that you can participate in. And we're planning a few of our own for September. So we'll have more to
Hmm.
say about that soon. But yeah, that's the basic idea. Oh, lastly, when you have written them, we ask you to indicate on the website that they've been prepared, and then when we reach the mail date, we will ask everybody to indicate that they have been sent, because we try to keep pretty close track of which ones have and haven't been sent.
Right, that makes really good sense. Yeah, I have to say, one of the things I was really excited about when I heard about your campaign was that this was something that you could do with COVID. Because
Yeah,
normally I've been one of the people that would volunteer to go out and knock
yeah,
on doors and all
yeah.
of that good stuff.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah. And so I definitely thought, well, this is something I've got to make sure I sign up for because I can sit at home and do it while I'm, watching
Yeah,
Netflix or whatever it might be.
for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's been fortuitous, that we happen to have a program that is doable even from home safely.
Hmm.
We had a lot of people who were excited about it even before the pandemic, obviously, partly because it has the advantage I was alluding to before, that it's an effective thing you can do now, like way in advance of the election. Um, but I think we are glad to see that for many of our volunteers, it has proved to be, I think, a good salve for anxiety about our politics, to be able to, do this thing from home.
To do something.
To do something, exactly.
Yes.
That's the core of it. Is In fact, when I first started the program, I found myself sort of scrolling through Twitter, getting angry about something, and then I would like channel all of that anger into writing more letters, which I still do sometimes
Good for
myself.
you. Good for
Um,
you.
so
Yeah, I was just
yeah,
telling somebody the other day that, sometimes when I feel most upset or, frankly afraid sometimes about everything that's going on, I the only thing that makes me feel better is if I work on a podcast like this or I write another essay or, you know,
yeah,
and even though it's sometimes hard to do that because it is upsetting, a lot of the things that we're having to talk about these days. But at least if I feel like I'm doing something about it,
yeah.
then, I can sleep a little better at night.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the best antidotes for anxiety is action.
You're
um,
right. You're
so
absolutely right.
yeah,
Can I ask you, can you tell me a little bit more about the tests that you did and how you came to this strategy?
sure. Yeah. So some of this comes from my personal background. So I am a software person, professionally, and so I'm relatively new to the political world. But my professional experience involved a lot of applied behavioral science. So I used to work for this company called Opower that used actually direct mail and software and uh, social psychology tactics to encourage people to reduce their home energy consumption. Um,
Ah,
so, and we were able to show at O-Power that these kinds of tactics had a meaningful, observable effect on electricity and natural gas usage if you sort of give people more information and apply a very mild form of social pressure, to encourage them to conserve. And I had sort of nursed the idea for a while since I worked there that we might be able to use similar kinds of tactics to influence civic participation. And so, because I am a little bit obsessive, I decided to just do my own experiment in 2017, to test it out. And so I wrote 1,000 letters from my kitchen table, as part of our first experiment, and then the following a few months later, it takes a long time to get data back on this question, but
yeah,
when we got an updated voter file, we were able to see that it really did boost turnout by multiple percentage points. That one was 3.4
fantastic.
percentage points, and I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess this is my job now. And
You just created a new job for yourself then.
exactly, I invented a job for myself. So
Woohoo!
um, over the subsequent couple of years, I did it sort of volunteer for a while, and then we did a few more randomized trials where we, demonstrated again that it worked just to get more confident about it. And so then I decided to sort of form an actual nonprofit, and make it a lot bigger. So that's what I've been up to the last couple of years. Just to speak to the trials themselves, I feel like this is often a point that people find interesting. Um, we do basically the same thing that is done in the biomedical world. So our trials are what are called randomized control trials. So basically, what we do is we identify a universe of people who we're trying to increase turnout among, and then for each of those people, we kind of roll the dice and say, okay, half of them or a third of them go into what's called our control group, who get nothing from us. And then half or two-thirds go into what's called our treatment group, who we send a letter to. And then after the election, it's actually pretty straightforward in its most basic version. We just compare the voter turnout among the people who got a letter from us versus the people who didn't. And because of the randomization, they are identical in every respect that you could think of. And the bigger the experiment, the more confident you can be that there isn't any systematic difference between them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you get confident that you're really having an effect in the
Mm-hmm.
world. And so we've done now a number of those and have proven it, many times that it does seem to have that effect. One of our long-term goals is to help um, encourage the civic community, both on the political and the um, sort of core purpose side of our work, to be more rigorous about what works and what doesn't. I think a lot of political effort is expended still, although this has changed somewhat in recent years, on tactics that haven't been in any rigorous way shown to have an effect. And so, we're eager uh, to help, bring more of this perspective to the world. And I think it's one of the things that our volunteers really appreciate is that we try to be as rigorous as we can about only recommending actions that we're confident have an actual effect.
Uh-huh. That's great. What about folks that speak different languages? Do you have Spanish speaking and other
That is
translated
that
letters?
is a great question. We are working on that. It's a little bit harder than I expected because there isn't any reliable data that we've been able to find on who among our target audience of people we're trying to increase turnout for um, speaks a different language. You can sort of guess based on various other factors, where they live and names and whatnot, but there's some risks around that. You don't want to be presumptuous um, and sort of make assumptions that might turn people off.
Hmm.
So we almost certainly wouldn't ever do a monolingual uh, test or campaign because it requires making an assumption and sort of risks turning people off. But we're interested in testing a bilingual version of the letter in a place where we think it would meet with where it would be useful. We're still trying to figure out where the right place to do that is and how to construct that experiment. So we've thought a lot about it, but we haven't executed on that plan just yet.
Miami.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean,
Really?
obviously there are geographies where the concentration of Spanish speaking people is higher.
Right.
We'll focus there,
Right.
for
Yeah.
sure. But we're still trying to figure out exactly how to do that.
Of course, I mean, that's not the only spot in the country by any means. I get that. But I will say that, I do think it's important to not wait on that one if you have any chance, because,
Yes.
during Clinton's campaign, I was floored when I heard shortly after the election that her entire campaign only spent $300,000 on outreach to the Hispanic and Latino communities.
Is that right? very
which
surprised by
is
that.
stunning.
I,
Yeah.
d-
And
I didn't. Hmm,
I think that these days it's really pretty critical.
yeah,
Even if you're just doing it in, neighborhoods where there's a very large percentage of Spanish speakers, and it's a bilingual kind of, and I'm using Spanish as an example because it's kind of the biggest second
second
language,
most. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But not the only one, obviously, here in Minnesota. In the Twin Cities in particular, but not just the Twin Cities, we have a very large Somali population,
Hmm,
Ethiopian, Hmong population.
hmm,
So I'm just putting that out there because
yeah.
I think that it's something I worry about, frankly, here in my home state, is that
We're,
the populations have gotten so large, and I don't know that our um, campaign infrastructure has fully caught up with that.
I think you're right about that. It's definitely a priority for us. We're trying. We do. There's one other reason to be a little bit cautious in that the literature that I've seen on previous attempts by other campaigns, sort of like ours, some of it has shown that if you try to do uh, if you try to communicate in other languages, it can actually have less effect. And so I that's not dispositive, obviously, and we really do want to try it, but it is another example of a situation where we before we roll anything out too widely, we try to be very sure to test it and make sure that it really does work. I'm doing everything I can think of, so I hope everybody out there
You're
is
doing
doing.
fantastic.
Um,
You're
Thank
doing
you.
something really powerful and really positive.
For
As I
sure.
think what you're doing is
Yeah.
has real potential to make an impact.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I just
Yeah,
mean that I'm hoping everybody who's listening is thinking to themselves, well, what am I doing in the next
right,
90 days?
right.
And it I think Vote Forward is definitely an option. Not the only option. You can go volunteer at the polls, especially young people. We're going to need a lot of young people to staff the polls in the COVID era. You can you can still make phone calls. You can still write texts, and you can write a lot of
Absolutely.
letters. Yeah, I hope
Absolutely.
everybody listening will ask yourself, um, what can I do today
Yeah.
to help American democracy survive this moment of crisis?
Yes, yes. Well, that sounds like a fabulous note to end on. Let me just ask you, Scott, before we close things out for today, is there anything else that you would like to particularly highlight or tell folks about in terms of the campaign or deadlines? And could you give us that
The
URL again?
URL,
The
sure.
Yeah,
Yes. So we are currently at about 4 million out of our 10 million goal letters written. But that means that, doing some basic arithmetic here, that means we have 6 million to go, which is a lot. And so we really do need your help. Even if you sign up and write only 5 letters, it'll take you, 25 minutes, and cost you uh, less than $3. That would be a huge help. So I hope you'll do that. And if you want to, the place to do it is at votefwd.org. That's votefwd.org, or just Google Vote Forward, and you'll land at the right place to sign up.
fabulous. And that's what I did, was just Google Vote Forward, and there was your website.
Yep,
So,
there we are.
and just to prepare folks that there will be a little bit of back and forth while your team verifies the folks that
Yes,
sign up, which is a very smart thing to do. I
yes.
totally appreciate why you need to do that. But again, Scott, I just want to thank you not only for your time, but for the work and the commitment that you've personally made. I
Thanks.
am very excited about this campaign. I think that particularly with COVID, it is an outstanding solution to some of the logistical problems that we're facing with Get Out the Vote this year.
Yeah. Thanks. We think so too. Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure speaking with you. And yeah,
Absolutely. Well, this brings us to the end of today's episode from Reconstruction.us, the place where people from all walks of life discuss what we can all do to transform America into a more equitable nation and ourselves in the process. I hope you have enjoyed this podcast, and I really want to encourage you, if you like what you hear, to please check out our website, re-construction.us, and there you will find many other interviews on regular podcast audio, as well as essays and stories about transformation. Also, this is our first time posting our podcast on YouTube, and we would really love to get the word out. So please do like, subscribe, and share generously with your friends and family who you think might be interested in learning more about voteforward.org, getting out the vote this November, as well as reconstruction.us. Again, thank you so much and have a wonderful week.